Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome back into the National Soccer Network's presentation of Inside the Game. I'm Jonathan Turner alongside Nathan Wangler. It is Friday. It is episode number 10. How we doing, my friend?
Good, hanging in there. Kind of a somber day yesterday. I guess we were doing our, Mount Rushmore, talking about, some of our top athletes, and then for a moment, I guess we touched on top broadcasters. And you're talking about, some of our favorites, and I had mentioned, Doc Emmerich, and you had mentioned Al Michaels. And as irony would have it, literally, I think as we were speaking, news had broken in the sports world that Bob Uecker had passed away at the age of 90 years old. And I know we chatted pretty much in length about the importance of your voice breeding familiarity, but not just that, being the listener's friend, being someone that anytime they hear you, it's not like you're being talked at. It's not like you're listening to a salesman. You're listening to your best friend. You're listening to someone you would sit next to at the stadium or at the bar or whatever it was. He was all of that. Bob Uecker was in his career in broadcasting games, not just for the Brewers, but in his acting career, and in his short playing career. And there was a really, really good quote that I saw yesterday, and it was from Jesse Goldberg Strassler. He's the radio voice of the Lansing Lugnuts, and I thought that he summed up Bob Uecker's life and career and who he was as a person really good. In pretty much just a couple of sentences, he goes, "It's hard to be funny. It is very hard to be funny, genuinely funny," and that's what he was. But he goes, "It's hard to be funny. Then again, it's hard to catch a knuckleball." But somehow he found employment and success with both of those. And that's pretty much what defines what Bob Uecker's career was. And by the way, the guy he told to throw the knuckleball when he was in his playing career is in the Hall of Fame now. So caught a knuckleball, found a career and success in acting, and obviously the movie Major League, he's iconic for. And then obviously his broadcasting career, he was one of the original greats with his stories and his warmth and his openness and his ability to, again, make you feel like you know this person without ever having met this person. I've never met Bob Uecker a day in my life, but I feel like I know a lot about him just through absorbing what his career was, at least for the short time that I did. I know that he was around for a much longer time than I was, but he was an OG. He was a legend in this career, and it's tough, and I know we can continue on to what we were going to talk about, but I think it's tough also realizing that, especially with people, you and I, there's this constant grind every single day to get to that level, but also realizing that at the end of the day, it'll come to an end. And that's a hard place to be because Bob did it all the way up until the very end. He was still in baseball. He was still doing what he was best at, what, the Lord put him on earth to do, right up until the very, very bitter end. So I think his dedication, his commitment, and obviously his warmth and his ability to really bring you in along on the journey anytime he put the headset on was really what defined his magical career. So rest in peace. And that's a tough one for the broadcasting community to lose because, everybody has role models. Athletes have role models. Everybody does. Broadcasters are no different. And that's why we talked about it yesterday. And he was certainly one of mine. Obviously was not on my list, but he's still on someone's Mount Rushmore somewhere. So rest in peace. Just wanted to throw that out, before we get started.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously for me, my recollection or my fondest memories of Bob are obviously Major League, right? In the movie. I'm not a Milwaukee Brewers fan. Obviously, he was with the Brewers for a very, very long time, right? So, but iconic, right? Major League, right? And his drinking because it was so bad. But yeah, we obviously wish him and his 90 years young, right? I mean, he lived a great life, and Bob Uecker. There it is. And the WWE remembers Bob Uecker as well. Look at that. So, but I found that just a moment ago here.
It all.
I found that
and they called him Mr. Baseball, but he wore so many different hats that it was kind of nuts to see. So yeah, everybody in the sports community should at least just take a moment just to read up on him. If you haven't watched Major League, if you haven't, it's a very entertaining movie, but it would be worth, especially when they come out with a documentary or movie or whatever it is they do. Take a second to watch it because it's a very polished, a very, very decorative career. and someone that even at 90 years old, it's tough to lose. So, what's up, Peter? Welcome back, as always.
So you and I, we do this every morning. We hop in here usually about 15, 20 minutes prior to the show, and we kind of, um, have these kind of conversations about what we're going to talk about. And I didn't talk about this with you during this part of our kind of conversation. We are going to dive in today, defining what a goat is, because not the animal. I want to premise it with that. We're not going to define what the physical animal of a goat is, but we are going to have a conversation about greatest of all time and how loosely this generation is using goat. And again, we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But this actually might even apply to euchre. Right. And again, not the game, Bob Uecker, who we just talked about, even though Euchre's a fantastic game, fantastic human being and a fantastic game, by the way. If you're from Michigan, Euchre is a Midwestern game. I haven't played it in a minute, but I love Euchre. But anyways.
Sorry.
No, what?
I hate it.
Oh, geez.
I hate it.
Oh, okay.
Anywhere I go. You play euchre?
Wow.
There's other card games that exist. Anyways,
today's world, though, just hearing that we might just soundbite that and put that out to the world today, saying how you hate euchre and see what kind of traction you get. But
I'm not hustling anybody, by the way. I genuinely don't like it. Continue.
That's right. Don't forget Mr. Belvedere. Wasn't he? He was, in fact, the character, right? The was an elf. What was his name?
I've only seen it once in my life, so I can't really remember that one too fondly.
I know. I'm just talking about what was the name of the character. I'm sure Peter will tell me. Anyways, okay. So, when should we as broadcasters? When should we stop doing this? You know what I mean? Like, when is your time? I was just talking about this with a friend of mine, and here in Michigan, and listening to the Detroit Pistons. If you have listened to a Detroit Pistons game on the radio, or have watched the Pistons on our local channel, whether that be Fox Sports Detroit, which it used to be, then it was Bally's, and now it's FanDuel something. George Blaha has been the play-by-play TV guy for 25 years. Mark Champion has been the radio broadcaster for 25 years, 24 years. I think since early 2000s. I'm not sure his exact age, but you got to be pushing 75. All right. When should someone step away? I mean, I understand we want, commentators, and I know Ernie Harwell, he was actually booted in Detroit. Remember, he got kicked out by the Tigers. They got rid of him, and then that was a big debacle. And then they're like, they brought him back so he could leave on his own terms. They canned him. I mean, for lack of better terms.
Yeah.
Ernie was, and again, I'll put Ernie in a different category for a second. I don't know if Mark Champion has the same level of icon, legendary as a Bob Uecker, right, in Milwaukee, or an Ernie Harwell here in Michigan, right? So George Blaha, I don't know if George Blaha rises to that level of iconic, right? I don't believe that he does. But again, I'm sure people are listening in and want to chime in. By all means, chime in. But I don't believe they're like these icons of we look at the greatest broadcasters. If Al Michaels was here in Michigan, I think we'd be having that conversation. Now, Mike Tirico, who's a local product of Michigan, he's not calling one singular game. But if he were to stop doing Sunday Night Football and came in and started doing Michigan games, I think Mike Tirico could rise to that level of icon if he were to do it for a long period of time. Jim Brandstatter, was he iconic? Iconic analyst. I would not call him an iconic play-by-play guy. I thought his play-by-play
in the eyes of Michigan fans.
Yeah, that's right. But again, I think iconic in your local market, that's fine. Again, Ernie Harwell, well, he was revered nationally, but he was iconic here. Yep. You know what I mean? So, anyways, my perspective on this is this. When should we be calling it quits? I mean, is 75, nasally and, the same level of energy that you had at 42, is not going to be the same level of energy of 75. Why are teams still sticking around with this talent when there are a ton of up and comers who you could probably get for cheaper? Let's be honest. You could probably bring somebody in who has less experience, bring them in for way less money, and people are still going to tune in. So I'm trying to understand the mindset of these organizations who are so quick to fire a head coach after, halfway start to the season, pretty shitty. Why are we hanging on to play-by-play and color analysts as if they can't do any harm? I mean,
Because there's an emotional connection to these people. And as a company, there's also that side of things that you have to consider the PR storm that is going to happen if you want to do something like that. So you brought up obviously Ernie Harwell. Do you happen to know the one who got rid of him? Bo Schembechler.
Oh, yeah,
he was the one that actually ended up firing Ernie Harwell, and it's the reason why he was kind of a controversial figure to a lot of people in Michigan for a little while, even Michigan fans. And to Bo's credit, he was probably looking at Ernie and saw that he was getting older. He was maybe making certain mistakes. He was maybe missing fly balls. Maybe he was a half step behind on some of his calls. The way that we see with a lot of these older broadcasters, once they kind of get to the end, the wheels start to fall off because obviously our senses are not what they are now.
Mine are falling off now, and I'm only 33, so,
Yeah. Well, so to Bo's credit, he probably saw that was the case. And so in his mind, he was probably like, well, we can move on and get someone younger and maybe a little bit cheaper that is going to kind of pick up the torch. But Tigers fans absolutely lost their mind. And rightfully so, they lost their mind because there was, again, that emotional connection to Ernie. Now, I would say he is legendary status. I think Ernie Harwell is certainly in that crop of legendary, iconic voices in the history of baseball. But it's a really hard thing because once you are in that spot, once you're in the club, once everybody loves you, once everybody expects you to show up, you can't really replace that person as a company justifiably and not have thousands and thousands and thousands of people pissed at you without there needing to be a reason why you did it. And okay. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's right. So the other, it's a lot of it is up to you. And that's the hard part because much like athletes, right? Brady wins a Super Bowl, he retires. There are other quarterbacks in the NFL that have won Super Bowls and retired. There have been other athletes that at the top of their career where you think, we just talked about one yesterday with Barry Sanders. He didn't need to retire. Physically speaking, age-wise, he didn't need to leave. Obviously, he was sick of losing, so that's why, he left. Same thing with there's a list of names that we could list off that left while it was still good enough that they could play, but they rode off to the sunset realizing that the wheels are going to fall off at some point. And another example in broadcasting is Doc Emmerich. I was talking about him yesterday. A lot of broadcasters go into their 70s. He wasn't even 70 yet. And he retired. Yeah. And people are like, well, why? And my big reason was he did it before the wheels could fall off. So I think a lot of it is a personal decision. But why do companies hold on to these broadcasters? Because they realize that there is, again, that emotional connection between the fan base and this person. And so maybe they're willing to overlook some of those little things that they've kind of lost their edge, if you will.
I don't know. I'm not saying that isn't a percentage of these organizations. And excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. So I apologize. I'm not saying that, but yeah, there's definitely an emotional component to this. But I don't believe for 1 second that the Detroit Pistons are going, man, if we got rid of Mark Champion or George Blaha, that people would stop tuning in and loving us. That's not even in their mindset. Yeah, and the reason why I say that is because they have been, to the lack of better terms, they've been terrible the last decade and a half. So again, there are, if I look at it from the standpoint of every level of sport in this country, while I do believe that the person who is in charge of the microphone is a very important part of the overall value of a team. I don't know if within the ownership group and within the team management that they are really giving it as much thought as me and you are even talking about right now. You know what I mean? I don't think it's you know what?
Because they're not. Yeah,
It's like on the list of things that they worry about. It's down here somewhere. As long as this person doesn't screw up and say something terrible on the air and go on some tirade or some kind,
yep,
I don't think they care.
yep. And as long as he's easy to work with,
Yep.
he gets along with people,
Yep.
he doesn't cause any issues. No one wants to get rid of him, because the other thing that you deal with a lot in our industry, and it's one of the tough things, because again, we talked about you got to have a level of it, but once you have too much of it, it can actually end up working against you, is things like ego and owning your space. And when you introduce a new young broadcaster into the mix, maybe you get someone who's a little bit more high maintenance. Maybe you get someone who causes more issues, or isn't as connected to the organization, or this, that, or the other thing. There are a lot of things to think about. But the other thing you said on the priority list, JT, we are always, talent wise, we are always at the bottom of the priority list. I'm not going to say every single time, but when we're talking about money wise here, I'm just saying.
No, I get that. And the reason why I thought this was a good conversation to start off with, because we're going to have this conversation about what a GOAT even is and how does it apply here in just a moment. Obviously, if you're in that role, if you're Mark Champion, you're George Blaha, you're, the Vince Scully's of the world, right? You're these people who have been doing this for such a long time. The Euchre, don't tell me it's my time to walk away. I mean, I think even like George Blaha's not even doing road trips anymore, right? He stays home, right? So now the Pistons have to send somebody else out for away games and someone for home games. So that changes the dynamic of a broadcast anyways, right? Because whoever's doing that game is going to be doing it differently than Blaha. So now there's a production aspect of this. While it might be all the same, dealing with different people, all those different times here, it makes things interesting, I would imagine, from a production standpoint. But I almost feel like, organizations should, hey, we need to, hey, when Derek Jeter was like, I'm done. When Cabrera was like, I'm done as an athlete, it became like this tour, right? This touring event. Oh, it's our swan song for Cabrera for an entire season, right? These broadcasters could do that, right? They could say, hey, this is my last season, and let me go out with a really cool way. Especially the ones who have on a local level have, been endeared by the general public, in that market. George Blaha would be in that ballpark. I think Mark Champion. I mean, I remember growing up and listening to Mark Champion saying, "Holy mackerel!" And you gotta be kidding me. I heard him on the radio doing those calls. So I'm fearful that they lose it's like you're putting a stain on their career, because they're sticking around a little bit longer, a little bit. And like I said, I listened to a broadcast earlier this week, and I was just like shaking my head going, man, this is not the same caliber of broadcast I'm used to listening to from this individual. Yeah. And it's like, man, and I know that it's like, there are certain times they'll call in and he's not going to do a game because he's sick. And okay, so as you go into your career, you're going to start doing that. You're going to start making these decisions where maybe you wouldn't have made those when you were in your 40s. I'm going to battle through this. Now I'm 75. I can't battle. I'll die. So it's like, you have to kind of take it easier. So I don't know. I don't want them to get like a stain on their career, and I don't want that, or on their, all people think about them and what they're known for because they hung on for too long, right? Because no one was willing to say, hey, I'm not going to fire you, but you need to go, man. You need to step away and walk away from this thing. That's my perspective, at least.
The other hard thing is the area of the country too. Thanks, Peter, for the comment. How many times you turn off the volume? Don't like the broadcasters at all. Hey now. Hey now, and just turn on the AM radio. Okay, all right. Let's leave Harry Carey out of the conversation. All right.
Well, I think
Well,
he's saying. I think he's saying.
them are fighting words, Peter.
I think
I'm
he was
just kidding.
saying. I think he was saying that you turn on the AM radio so you could hear Harry Carey, because Harry Carey was
Yeah.
a radio call. So again, that's not uncommon, right? I mean, we hear people all the time talking about, well, I can't stand, the ESPN broadcast. So I want to hear the radio call, our local radio call. And that's, how many people are turning on and listening to Dan Miller for the Lions versus listening to, Joe Buck, if you don't like Joe Buck. I mean, so there is something to be said about that.
Oh, okay.
I just don't want or think that we need to have people still calling games into their 90s when there is into their 90s when they were great in their mid 70s still, and you have people coming up the pipeline, right? And let's get the fresh blood in there, right? Especially for a team like the Pistons, who have been struggling and have a really young core group of players that are helping them, kind of have a really good. They're having a pretty semi decent season this year, and I don't know. That's my perspective. I don't want to label.
I get it. That's just the ultimate reality of what we're dealing with and we're fighting with every single day, trying to get into this industry and trying to break in and find positions. It's just like I said, once teams, organizations, and more importantly, I'll say this because I think it has more to do with sometimes the market that they're in necessarily than the team specifically. When you talk about Midwest fan bases, like those people become so, and I know that we kind of bypass the whole emotional connection thing, and that shouldn't matter. But I'm just saying to these companies it did, and to the people who work in this company in the front office, they're always thinking in those terms. What's best for the company in terms of the public, PR and everything else along those lines. They're not talent coaches. They're not, people in there that are thinking, looking at stuff all the time and, oh, we missed a call here and missed a call there. It's, do people still like this guy? Great. We love him. He's not causing any issues. He'll be back in the seat next year. So it's unfortunate, but it's one of those things where you just kind of throw your hands up and you're like, this is reality of what we're fighting with every single day in this field.
No doubt. Let's talk here about GOAT. Again, not the animal. We're going to talk GOAT, greatest of all time. And I mean, we can talk about some players who maybe we think could fit into that terminology, this acronym of sorts. But I'm going to be the first one to tell you that this term is used way too much, and to be fair, has really devalued what I believe to be the superior athlete, the icon of sorts, who really is deserving of that phrase, who is deserving of being called the greatest of all time. And again, I understand that we have a younger generation of fan, a younger generation of teenagers and viewers and whatever, and they want to call everybody a GOAT. I get it. I mean, I don't get it, but I mean, to the conversation about comparing Michael Jordan and LeBron James, that's never going to ever change. It's never going to, like, that whole thing is never going to, it's always going to be a battle. Why? Because I grew up with Michael Jordan and I grew up with LeBron James. And my parents, my dad, he grew up watching Michael Jordan, right? Your dad grew up watching Michael Jordan. So he's going to arguably say, well, no, Michael Jordan was better, right? We're going to argue about whether LeBron James should be there. I didn't grow up during Jack Nicklaus's time period in my lifetime. I grew up during Tiger Woods. So if you're going to ask me who the best golfer of all time is, I'm going to tell you Tiger Woods, because generationally, I was watching Tiger Woods at his prime. I wasn't watching Jack Nicklaus in his prime. So there's always going to be that dialogue and that conversation between generations where they're going to have a different opinion of who the GOAT is. I'm not disputing that. I mentioned this yesterday on the show as we were kind of teeing this up. You cannot tell me that your local whoever is a GOAT in your soccer leagues, locally. You can't do that. Great player, sure. A superior player, yeah, why not? But to say GOAT, you are implying they are the greatest of all time. That is what you are implying. You're not implying anything else. That's what it stands for. That is how it is written. Okay, we're not calling this good old ass. I don't know, like I don't know even what the T would be in this scenario. This isn't an average player. This isn't for an above average player. This is designed for a player who transcends time, who you could have generational conversations with and have supporting documentation, statistical data to back up your argument.
Right.
And I'm tired of hearing the phrase GOAT when it comes to athletes. Okay? Cade Cunningham is not a GOAT. Okay? He's not a GOAT. Stop calling him a GOAT. Again, I'm not saying like the pundits, the national pundits are not calling Cade Cunningham a GOAT. However, our fan base is probably calling him a GOAT. Jared Goff. I love Jared Goff. He is not a GOAT.
Right.
He's not a GOAT.
Yeah.
Now, could he become a GOAT? I would argue on that because, again, if we're talking about the greatest of all time, this is not a singular MVP type season. This is not looking at it from the standpoint of a singular moment in time. This is over a body of work. Tom Brady is a GOAT because of his career body of work. It wasn't just because he played. Let's be honest. Had he never won a single Super Bowl in New England and went to Tampa Bay and won just one Super Bowl there, would he be in the conversation for GOAT? Not even close. It wouldn't even be close. But because he won so many Super Bowls in New England, it only solidified him being the GOAT when he went into Tampa Bay and won one there. Right? It only made it more sense to call him that. But you cannot just call the random, unless we want to start to redefine what GOAT means and say you can have your local GOAT. Is Sergei Fedorov our Detroit, Michigan, local Red Wing GOAT? Is Barry Sanders our local GOAT? I would, based on his career, Barry Sanders is considered a GOAT in the NFL when it comes to running backs. Third all time, right? On the list, right? He is arguably a GOAT. And again, if you were to go and ask anyone who grew up during, the Chicago Bears runs, right? And Walter Payton, there'd be this debate between Walter Payton fans and Barry Sanders fans who would say, why is Walter Payton the GOAT versus Barry Sanders? That would actually happen. And I'm okay with that. But I'm not okay with saying that Derrick Henry is a GOAT.
You and I both know it's the GOAT, not the Ohio State. The GOAT and a GOAT are very different. Using the term a GOAT, when you say greatest of all time, that there's a period on the end of that. There's not greatests of all time. There isn't a list of greatests of all time. It's one. And so I think in the literal sense, you and I both understand what GOAT means. But I also feel like maybe a little bit we gotta realize that we can't take the Fortnite generation too seriously when they start throwing around terms. Because the thing is they hear one term and then they want to overuse it for the next 2 years. They want to use it in every single sentence that they ever use.
Thing for you to
Riz is a good example, right? Do you know what Riz means, Jonathan Turner?
I mean, to be fair, my kids use it all the time. They use words like glazing too. Like you're getting glazed. Glazing. I'm like, what in the heck does that even mean?
It's like flirting. It's like their generation's version of like flirting. You got Riz, right? So I'll talk to a lady at the grocery store and ask her, where do I find the bath towels? And, she'll smile as she does with customer service and be like, it's on aisle 12. And then the 12-year-old's like, ooh, you have Riz. It's like, you'd
have to define the terms. I'm not even one to my kids use like, that was really Sigma of you. Like, what does that even mean?
They just use these terms. So someone at some point brilliantly coined the term GOAT. So we could stop using greatest of all time because that just seems like a mouthful. So we'll just start using GOAT. And then obviously places like ESPN, SportsCenter, they all catch on to it. So there's always this conversation every week, which it draws the most clicks and most views. who's the GOAT, but for everywhere from MJ versus LeBron to, Brady versus whoever the next guy is. There's always GOAT conversations going on. So I think we've introduced a new term to this generation that they now just kind of go around throwing around willy-nilly. I also think it's a product of there's just a lot of athletes out there that think that they're at a higher level, a much higher level, and much better than what they are based on whatever league they're in. And you were mentioning some professionals. I think if you play in the NFL, if you've even made a practice squad roster, I think that you are a minor GOAT, maybe, because there's only a fraction of a percentage of people that ever make the league, let alone have success.
Nathan, you cannot do that, man. You cannot go minor GOAT on me like that. No,
you're one of the greatest football players of all time if you've made the NFL, Jonathan Turner.
No, you're not.
Yes.
No.
Especially if you put up the career numbers of Derrick Henry. Yes.
Dude, I totally disagree with you. Dude, you're out of your mind if you think that you can
call someone a GOAT because they made the NFL. One of the best of all time?
That could then apply to everything, every sport.
So you're right. So you're saying it's only reserved for the greatest of all time.
Again, we start talking about the differences between, a player making the NFL and a player not making the NFL, right? And those differences, by all means, they are way above the norm in regards to what they provide as far as their athletic and knowledge of the game and all those kinds. By all means, but I look at it like this, right? There is this every year. There's only one champion. Right? There's only one champion. And for that year, you were the best team. Now, does that mean that you were, in fact, the best team? Let's be honest here. We look at the NFL specifically. Is the best team this year going to win the Super Bowl? And we could argue that probably might not be the case because, again, like the Ravens have been like the talk, the Eagles, the Lions, okay? And obviously I want the Lions to win more than anybody else in this area. But are they, in fact, the best team statistically, right? All these things that make them the best. But we define the best by the team by the last day of the season has won that last and final game. That's what we have determined is, in fact, the best, okay, for that season. Now, if you look at a team that wins successfully over a period of time and does it consistently and wins the last game of the season, do we consider them one of the greatest franchises of all time? The answer to that is yes. There are a lot of teams in the NFL. There are 32 teams in the NFL, right? Give or take. Maybe there's 33. I don't know, 32. And those 32 teams only, again, looking at who's won the Super Bowl the most in the last 3 decades, who has it been? It's been New England. Is New England Patriots one of the greatest franchises in the history of the sport? Yes or no?
One of, yeah, I'd say second, but one of.
Is there an argument to call them one of the greatest franchises of all time in the NFL?
Yes.
There's an argument for that. Okay. Yeah. Cleveland Browns, are they in the argument? No. And why not?
Historically speaking,
I mean, they're in the NFL.
They're one of the worst.
I mean, they're in the NFL. I mean, they've made it there. I'm just saying
by that organization was okay.
I'm just saying by that logic. If we start to say, well, you know what, they have to be a great player. Of course, they have to be a great player to get there. Of course, they do. They have to be a great player to get to the NFL. You have to be a great player to be able to hit a baseball 3 out of 10 times in Major League Baseball in order to get there, right? You have to do things way above average. And to be fair, a lot of it has to do with not so much about how good you are as it is about how marketable you are today and how lucky you are too. There's a lot that goes into these. It's not just about talent. I wish it was because, to be fair, there's a lot of kids out there who have a lot of talent who will never play in these leagues because they right positioning, unlucky, whatever. I just don't want to diminish and devalue what we consider to be the greatest of all time. You cannot tell me that Michael Jordan should be in the same category as Steve Nash. They're not in the same category. But to some, they are. Maybe. Jason Kidd. You know, I mean, like, should he even be in that conversation? And based on what you said about how, well, you know, maybe like a minor GOAT. Well, no, because that devalues what a player like Michael Jordan has done for basketball. it devalues what players like Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Barry Sanders, Walter Payton have done for football. You know what I mean? Not every player. Again, if we look at it from the Hall of Fame standpoint, how many players are in the Hall of Fame? It's like 300 to 400. It's not a ton. You have to be the best in your sport to be even considered. You're talking, what, 5 to 6 a year, right? So whatever that number is, maybe it's less than 300. I don't know the numbers, but maybe it's like around 300. You could argue that anyone in the Hall of Fame could possibly be a GOAT. I think that's an argument. You know what I mean?
Possibly.
Yeah, I think you could argue that anybody in the Hall of Fame in a sport could be considered one of the greatest of all time. You know what I mean?
If I'm tracking what you're saying, essentially what you're saying is that we're throwing this term around too loosely.
Oh my God, yes.
So
the greatest of all time. It's not the greatest of yesterday. Right. It's not the greatest of this season. It is the greatest of all time.
So it bothers you simply because the term is thrown around too much by the people, like the fan bases that follow the sport, or are we talking about the people who actually cover it, like the pundits and the national media and stuff like that? Because what I will say is this: recency bias runs rampant in sports. There is something about sports fans to where what is happening in the right here and right now is more important and more relevant and everything else than what happened before it. It was like me the other day when I was talking about Jayden Daniels, right? Jayden Daniels, I believe, is going to be one of the best. Thanks, Moritz. Mo Wagner.
Mo.
Anyways, Mo. Yeah, I truth is I do really agree with what exactly it is you're saying. But I just think the recency bias side of it, I think Jayden Daniels is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in football in the coming years. Now, he could go out and stink the next 2 years. But the recency bias side of it was because I just saw him in his last playoff game, Washington winning their first one in what it was, 2 decades or something, 2005, and what he was able to do in that game. And, the defense running, 2 spies against him every play because they know he can run and throw. So recency bias is a massive, massive thing in sports. And so when people see someone put up a crazy performance or have a crazy year, automatically the first thing that comes to your mind is you want to start having that conversation. Oh, could they be one of the greatest of all time? So, but everybody in every sport, you're always looking for that next GOAT because that's what kind of draws you to it. And that's why I think a lot of people throw that term around a lot, because the reason why I loved the NBA for a long time, or, the reason if I ever consume it, I know who the greatest players are in the league. Steph Curry, LeBron James, all those guys. The NFL. I grew up in the heyday, in my opinion. I had the likes of Brian Urlacher and Ray Lewis and a lot of those great names. So everybody is always looking for that next greatest. Everybody's looking for that next GOAT, and that's why they keep throwing that term around. It should be just reserved for the greatest in every sport. And I think that depends on position and other stuff like that. And obviously we can break it down, but I think, the voice crack there. Did you hear that one?
I did.
Jeez. Since 8th grade, it hasn't stopped. Anyways, we can have that conversation about different positions and different places and different teams and leagues and all that different stuff, who the greatest is. And I agree. It should be just reserved for those people, but it's really fun. And I'm going to put my fan hat on here right now. It is really, really fun to continue to look for who that next GOAT may be. And that's why it's always a rat race for every franchise. Oh, we found the hidden gem. We found the Kobe Bryant, or we were able to get the LeBron James, or we were able to get, whoever it is, name your GOAT. We were able to land a Tom Brady who plummeted in the draft and nobody wanted him because, frankly, he wasn't that great at Michigan. He was good at Michigan, but he didn't really hit on much of his, combine numbers. He didn't bench press anything. I don't even think he could do the bench press once. And all of a sudden he's out here and he's winning a handful of Super Bowls, and he's got a full hand in one and then a couple on the other. So everybody, every organization, every franchise, every team, every fan is looking to find that next GOAT. And so that's why, in my mind, that term is thrown around a lot. Now, should it be? No, we know who the GOATs are, right? In my mind, I think LeBron's the GOAT in basketball. People will say it's Michael Jordan. We could have a conversation about that. We can, again, go on sports beyond. It is reserved for those people. But the fun and the thrill of trying to find that next one and hoping that your team is the one that lands him, I think is just uniquely part of the sports landscape. So I agree. It's thrown around too loosely. And no, Cade Cunningham's not a GOAT. A lot of other players that are not a GOAT. I realize we chant Jared Goff's name at random sporting events and other things. GOAT is thrown around too loosely. And again, I think it's a generational thing. I think we latch onto these words and we just use them willy-nilly. But I think that's the fun side of sports, JT, is looking for who that next GOAT may be.
No, I'm not. I don't disagree with you on that. I don't disagree with our job in the media, and I still find myself kind of shaking my head saying that actually I'm in the media, but I find myself now in these moments. Again, our job is to entertain. Our job is to anyone who's watching or tuning in right now is to give them something to chew on that would make them want to come back and keep tuning in, right? And our opinions in regards to these things are I would imagine on some level are going to either bring people closer to watching our show or keep them from tuning in. But either way, I'm okay with that. I don't think Brad Holmes or Jerry Jones is looking for the next GOAT. I think they're looking for the next player that can fit into a system that leads them down to a path to hoisting a trophy. I don't believe they're looking for GOATs. They're looking for players that can, again, that fit into their system, that could rise to the occasion and do unbelievable things for them. Now, along the way, the GOAT thing might happen, but again, they're looking for a player that's going to actually end up panning out. And there's no way to determine that. There's no way to go with all these players who are coming out of college that this player is going to do really, really well in this league. You can, I mean, this quarterback, Jaden Daniels, right, from Washington. Okay, he's having a great rookie season. Okay, how many times have we seen a rookie come in, be successful in year one, and then shit the bed in year 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? Right? How many times have we seen a quarterback or a running back or anyone who has all this promise is coming into the league and they struggle? They struggle mightily. Why? Because the difference between going from college to the NFL, the difference between going from any collegiate sport to a professional level, there is a curve. And that curve, some players manage it well and some others don't. There's I remember it was like if you look at Green Bay Packers, whether you like the Packers or not, what they've been able to do with their quarterbacks over the last 3 decades has made their quarterbacks very, very good. Brett Favre, he sat behind a quarterback, learned, right? Then when Brett Favre comes in, what does he do? Aaron Rodgers comes in. Aaron Rodgers learns from Brett Favre. Then they put Aaron Rodgers in. Then what? Aaron Rodgers is there. Then Jordan Love comes in. Jordan Love is now starting in Green Bay. They have all sat, waited their turn, learned in a system, and now are having, again, you could argue what kind of success, but they're having success. Right? Tom Brady was thrown in after an injury from Bledsoe, and that kind of catapulted him to what he was. But if Bledsoe never goes down, do we still have that conversation about Tom Brady? So that's why I'm saying, like, I don't disagree with you in the fact that we in the media have to have these conversations about the GOAT and who they might be. I don't believe that general managers and owners of these teams are going, man, we're looking for that GOAT. No, we're looking for a player that could elevate us. And again, the byproduct of elevating you is getting an unbelievable player who can transcend the game. That's luck. Yeah. That's not
listen, yeah. I'll agree. Right? You want to develop them your way. A lot of different organizations, and I'll agree with that. I think the Spurs are a good example. I think they were a team once upon a time, another team growing up that with Pop at being their head coach and with all the different pieces they had a system that won. Bill Belichick's another great example. Yeah, Tom Brady became the GOAT because of his work ethic and because of his knowledge of the game and his ability to read things and understand things. I'm going to I'm going to disagree with you here.
Okay.
I think that teams are looking for players like that. They are looking for the greats. And they're looking for, that's the reason why you have talent scouts. That's why the reason why you have scouting in general, to be able to find that guy, that diamond in the rough that you can develop as a franchise that will take your team and everybody else to the next level. My question is, I'm going to throw this out there. Have you ever seen The Last Dance?
I think possibly.
The MJ? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not.
How many titles did Phil Jackson win without Michael Jordan?
0.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, 0.
Now, Phil Jackson and MJ, they didn't just butt heads. They fought over stuff. How practice should be run, what plays should be run, how things should be done. The whole reason, in my opinion, why Jerry Reinsdorf is able to just kind of stay where he is, whether it be with the White Sox or with the Bulls or whatever, was literally because of what MJ did. When you go to the United Center, it's the house that MJ built. There's Michael Jordan stuff all over the place. So he defined that franchise, and not only that, but he elevated everybody else's career to a new level. Every organization, I understand you have your ways of developing players, and that's great. Every organization is looking for that next transcendent athlete that they can get their hands on that will take their organization to the next level. And that's why you see scouting and all of this other stuff and how expansive it is. I mean, from not just from sea to shining sea. I mean, even in the sport of baseball, I mean, they're over in the Dominican Republic. These kids are playing at 10 years old and they're already scouting them. The reality is that, yes, they want them to fit into their system. Of course, every team does. Every team has an MO. Every team has a way of going about things, a strategy, whatever it is. But when you get a player like an MJ, like a LeBron, like something else, that's not just we're going to start winning more games. That might turn a dormant franchise into one that can actually go on and not only just make money, but be one of the marquee franchises in whatever league they're in. The Chicago Bulls became an iconic franchise overnight because of Michael Jordan. Before then, they were a doormat. They were the Cleveland Browns of the National Basketball Association. Then they get the GOAT, again, circling back to what we were talking about, to join their team. And again, a real, insert whatever word you want here, his teammates did not like him. Phil Jackson, very difficult to work with. He was so much of an individual. But what he did as an individual took that franchise into the stratosphere. What Tom Brady did in New England, what I'm trying to think of different sports, what Sidney Crosby did to the Penguins. The Penguins sucked. And then they got Crosby in there, and all of a sudden they're on this next level. Every organization, I think, in one way or another is looking for a GOAT. Now, how they go about that is up to them. And obviously Green Bay is able to loop a lot of different people in, but I thought this was a soccer podcast. I don't know. JT, you want to address that one?
Yeah, I mean, first off, we are on a soccer network, so we are going to have a lot of soccer-centric conversations. But this one specific today is about GOATs, and again, basketball being one of them. The conversation isn't about the greatest athlete of all time in the sense of in the sport. We're talking about the term, and that's kind of what today's about. And here's the thing: I don't disagree with you, Nathan. But if we look at, and I can even go to soccer right now and talk about the greatest of all time when it comes to U.S. women's and men's national teams, right? And talk about that for a moment. And who is arguably that. The reality is, if I look at it from the standpoint of a team trying to get a player in the MLS, okay, everyone's looking for the next greatest player. Everyone's looking for great talent. They're looking for great talent. I mean, Chloe Ricketts, for example, here from Michigan, she plays out on the West Coast, right? She's a player that is 14, 15 years old. I think she's actually going to be 16 this year. A young player. Went back when I was a kid. Freddie Adu was 14 and a half, 15 years old. They wanted to bring him into DC United. That failed miserably, right? There's another local byproduct here, Amalia Villarreal, who plays for Texas in women's soccer and also been part of the U.S. women's national team on the younger side. She's had some success there as well. I don't think that teams aren't looking for great players. But the Chicago Bulls were not looking for a player that was going to be considered the greatest of all time. They were looking for a player that would fit, that would help them win championships. And ultimately, Michael Jordan worked out. But keeping in mind that Michael Jordan was not a player that at that time, I think people were going, man, this is going to be he's a good player. But will he be great? I mean, Sidney Crosby might be a player again. He's another player that, again, I mean, coming into Penguin, young player, he was having success early on, but again, he was a player that, as he started to develop, we could really see that magic, right? You know, I mean,
but you know these front office people. You've dealt with them before.
Of course,
they all think they're the smartest person in the room.
Oh, yeah, there's an ego aspect to this, I think. There's no doubt about that. But again, if I look at it from the standpoint, go back to soccer for a second, and we stay there for just a moment, and this is for you, Michael, as you called this out for this, by the way. If I go back to soccer for this, you know, if I look at it from the standpoint of what is a team trying to do in the MLS right now, right? you know, you bring in, okay, if you're bringing in Lionel Messi's already there. Right, he was already there. He's at the end of his career, so Leo is only doing it to continue to play, and to be fair, because he is stepping down at the level of competition compared to that of the Premier League and the Champions League and the leagues that he played in across the pond. He knows that he could still play at a high level and have just as much success as if he was playing in his younger years in those leagues across in Europe. So that's why he's here, right? And in marketability, right? You're bringing in one of the best players. You're bringing in a GOAT to play right here in the United States. Beckham, right? I would argue that Beckham was not a GOAT, though. Beckham, a very good player, but I wouldn't put him in the GOAT conversation. You know what I mean? So that again is my personal viewpoint on that. But the MLS teams are looking this is why they start developing players at younger levels now in their MLS Next programs. They're trying to find a player that will come in immediately from the moment that they pull them into their team and have an impact. They're looking for impact players. Great is the biggest unknown in all of it, because all of these players by their own right are great, or else they wouldn't be there. Now it's about, how do I take that player who was an impact player and how do they become the next great? That all happens on their own accord based on what they can do on an individual level within the system. And then it all works out statistically, because at the end of the day, it's about statistics. It's nothing else, right? Statistically.
Yeah.
Right. And you look at the statistical aspect of this, right? So how many minutes is somebody playing, right? How many touchdowns are they throwing? How many championships are you winning? It's all stats, right? So, you know, again, every player coming in, and it goes back to your point about how like every football player is maybe a minor GOAT. No, every football player coming in is great. We can establish that, right? Or else they wouldn't be there. The question now becomes, does that great player, do they turn into somebody that transcends the game? And that is only something that can happen over the course of time and over a period of time in which during their gameplay, they change everything about it. Right? We talk about it. Aiden Hutchinson, who has I believe he has the ability to be a player like a JJ Watt, right? He has the ability to be a player like that. You know, there are players within U.S. soccer that have Christian Pulisic. He has the ability to become a great player that transcends time for the United States men's soccer team. Will he? You know, that's still yet to be determined. I don't believe so. I mean, he has changed the game in the United States. There's no question about that. He has made a huge impact on U.S. men's national team soccer. I mean, he has really been a player that we can kind of look at and go, okay, he is leading the ship. But will he transcend time? And I realize it's got to be the imagination.
I realize greatness is just a byproduct of all those things that you do right in terms of developing a player or the player developing themselves. But I still think, despite the fact that it's a byproduct, that the end goal is to get that player to that level. And they can do it themselves. It has to be a combination, right? You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. These organizations can do everything they can. You can put whoever you want to. Frankly, JT, if certain organizations...
You think they're thinking that way? You think that organizations on a management level, you think that coaches, and I'm looking at that as a former coach, you think that coaches are coaching players to be GOATs? I'm asking that for you just point blank. Do you actually think that?
No, they're not doing it with the intention of making them the
Okay. All right.
greatest of all time.
All right,
No, but
guys.
that's the whole thing, right? You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I'm going to give you the tools to be good or great, but you have to actually go out and do the work. But I do think there is this aspect of, do you have it? And it doesn't matter what sport it is. Again, it's the reason why we have all the different scouting tools, all the different recruiting tools. It's the reason why that is more than half of the game. I'd say the majority of the work, much like prep work in our industry, is recruiting, scouting, finding the right players for your organization. But they always talk about that thing. And I realize it's kind of out there. You can't really grasp it. What is it? We all kind of understand what it is, especially when we've seen it in person. And, with my experience being around young athletes, there are just a few, and I mean a few. I can count on one hand, probably 3 of them that I've seen in person, 3 or 4. And again, in a sport different than soccer, we don't have to dive into that. But I've seen on one hand how many players I know, whether it be their work ethic, whether it be how they are away from the sport, whether it be how they are in the weight room or how they perform on the field, all of those things combined with what the organization is doing, they have it. And they're already contributing on a major level at the major league level or at the highest level. So when organizations are recruiting and scouting and looking at players and talent, yes, okay, they want someone that fits their scheme, but they also want someone who, number one, has the ability to develop themselves the right way. We go back to the MJ example. He was staying at home and studying and shooting hoops as opposed to going out and drinking and, doing the cocaine and everything that those guys were doing back in those eras. He didn't do all that. They saw that in him and they're like, this guy's a basketball savant. He is a nerd. We need this kind of work ethic and this kind of thing on our team. And that's obviously what took them to the next level. No one is developing a player with, you're going to be the greatest of all time. But you and I both know when watching sports, when we see someone that has it, and that is the thing that these front office execs are looking for when they recruit, when they do all those things. Let's get the player that has it, that little extra that, yeah, they can be really good and we'll make you really good. I mean, there's certain teams that if they picked up you and me, Jonathan Turner, we would be serviceable out on the field just because of all the tools they have. But who has that next level that could be great, not just right here and right now, great. I don't know. I think organizations are looking for that in one way or the other.
Yeah, I think the intangibles that you're talking about, because to be fair, you need a player in order to be even in this conversation, you have to be a player that no one's asking you to do anything, right? There you have this intangible way about you that there's nothing that's going to get in your way for you to be successful. And that, to be fair, is the separating factor between probably every single player out there who is great and then to be the greatest of all time, right? There is this intangible. Again, you're unstoppable, right? That would be the way to look at it, right? Because all these players have talent. You couldn't tell me that Ryan Leaf didn't have talent. He had talent. He had a lot of it. He was a very good quarterback. But what he lacked was this unstoppable aspect of unstoppable. There's nothing that was going to get in his way. Nothing. Joey Harrington coming out of college, unbelievable athlete, right? Great quarterback. I mean, he could throw dimes like anybody on the long ball. They were looking for somebody that could throw the ball long, and he was better at the piano on Monday Night Football, right? So my point is that the intangible is definitely a separating factor here between those who are great and those who could be considered the greatest of all time. I don't think there's any dispute on that. And if you look at history, I'm sure every single one of the people who are in the conversation for GOAT are all the ones that carry these intangibles, the ones that they would run through a brick wall, to go where they wanted to go. It is currently, I mean, we're like right there, man. It's like 9:59 here in the morning. We've already almost surpassed our hour, but it's a good conversation. And hey, Michael, we appreciate the comment. Of course, this is a soccer-centric podcast in the sense that we are on the National Soccer Network. But I think the one thing that we wanted to be able to do with this show is just bring our personalities and bring this idea of talking about all things within the game, not just the game of soccer, but the game of life, game of sports, whatever. And soccer is obviously a big part of that. And today we are talking about GOAT, and we could have an argument about, who the greatest soccer players of all time are. And that's the conversation we will have here down the road. But today I wanted to figure out what the definition of GOAT was, and to see if we are in fact overusing that definition or using that word. And I do believe that we are, and we need to find a way in this world to stop identifying, average players, above average players, players who are maybe having a really good season, and giving them this platform of sorts to raise them to a certain level which they have not yet earned. And that was my perspective on this. And I'll give you the final thought on this one, Mr. Wengler.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much defined it. It is a soccer-centric, we are on the National Soccer Network. The biggest thing is that we just wanted an opportunity, an hour every morning to talk about, our lives and what we do as broadcasters in and around the sports that we do. Because also, you got to think, we don't just do sports, JT and I. I mean, we do a little bit of everything, and that's kind of what our jobs dictate. So we're going to talk about soccer a lot, and obviously as soccer continues to pick up and we do more of it and cover more games, more leagues, you're going to get more talk, and we're hoping to get different people onto the show to interview. That's another big thing that we've been chatting about a lot. But it is more, it's inside the game, yes, but it's inside of our lives at the same exact time too. So we just kind of want to shine a spotlight on that. But yeah, in terms of the GOAT conversation, listen, you and I know it's reserved for only a handful of people. I think people just like to throw around terms willy-nilly, but I also think it's a fun experience in the sports experience to think, who will the next GOAT be? Everyone's looking for him. So I don't know who that's going to be. If it is Cade Cunningham, that'd be nice, or just another Detroit sports figure, whatever. But I think it was a good conversation. I think it is overused. I will agree with you on that.
Don't forget, coming up here tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern here on the National Soccer Network, we've got the Dallas Sidekicks traveling into the two-time MASL consecutive champions, the Chihuahua Savage. That game kicks off at 9 p.m. Eastern here tonight. We got a full slate of games here tomorrow as well, so don't forget to watch those. You can watch those on Roku as well as on the National Soccer Network YouTube channel. For all of us here at the National Soccer Network and Inside the Game, my name is John Turner alongside Nathan Wengler. Don't forget to subscribe, like us, and share us with your friends and family. Make sure you check us out on all listing platforms at Inside the Game, presented by the National Soccer Network. And have a great rest of your Friday and an even better weekend. And we'll see you here on Monday for episode number 11.